All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome everybody who's not in period 6-7. This is our special guest that we've been trying to get in for months and months now. His name is Mr. Red Ellis. You have seen his name maybe on the street sign for Miko Road. Longtime Edison resident, World War II veteran, who's got great stories, better than anything you're going to find in your book, better than anything that I can tell you. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Ellis and Mrs. Ellis in the back to period 6.
All right, good morning, class.
Good morning.
You're so fortunate to have Miss Kirkpatrick as your teacher. I hope that I make this period a better part of your day, that you're not rushing off. I don't want anybody falling asleep or anything on me. Of course, that would ruin my whole day if I did that. So I did a little homework the other day. I went on the internet and I found out how many veterans of World War II are left. Right now, there's 17,000 veterans left in New Jersey. We're dying off at a rate of 430 a day. So I am part of what they refer to as the Great I can't see. But anyhow, I'm one of the last of the old folks that are around. And I'm going to bounce around here a little bit because I'm not the sharpest pencil in the box anymore. So turn on your computers, hit that click button, save, and you can play it back later on and hope you'll remember what I've had to deliver to you. I was in the 3rd Army and under the directions of George General Patton. This was our division insignia, which is worn on a patch on your arm. I was a prisoner of war. This was the gate to the prison that I was at the first. I escaped twice. This one I escaped the first time. And this prison was, I went for a long time never knowing where it was at, and searching on the internet, I finally located it because it was bothering me. I knew the camp, but I didn't know where it was. And it was located 50 miles northwest of Frankfurt, Germany, and 20 miles from Koblenz, Germany. And that's the picture of the gate. And behind that was a railroad marshaling yard. It was like a freight yard. And while we were in prison, I had lice, which are body lice, from the lack of a shower. We spent our days just trying to kill the lice in the sunshine. But we would see the American planes coming into Germany on a bombing raid. It was nice. It was beautiful to see the vapor trails and stuff as they were flying in for the bombing raids. Well, the worst part was when they returned, the fighter planes that came back with them that hadn't used up their ammunition would come down and strafe us, which wasn't a happy moment at all, because it was like the bullets bumping along the ground, and you had to stand straight, hoping that you were in the path of one of the bullets. But that was there. The camp wasn't marked as a POW, so we had no choice. And another thing, cigarettes were a big thing for people that smoked. Fortunately, I never smoked, and I have never picked up the habit. So the smoking got so bad the fellows would group together and save the remains of a cigarette, and they used to put all the remains into an aspirin box. I don't know if you know what an aspirin box is. It was a little box that held maybe a half a dozen aspirin. Well, they put their cigarettes in there, and then they got enough, they'd roll them in paper, and they got to a point where they put a straight pin and take a puff on a cigarette. I don't know how many guys had probably wound up with cancer of their lips after that, but their lips were burned to just scabs from just having to smoke. And the Germans would walk along the prints and toss their cigars or cigarettes just out of reach of the prisoners, enticing them. And that was their way of getting a little humor out of for their sex. And another thing, we slept on a cement floor with straw. That was our bedding. If you were fortunate and came when you get to, sometimes you weren't, if you were an old and hadn't gotten there earlier, you had no straw. You just slept on the cold floor. And at the back end of the building was where our latrine was. And it was nothing more than 25-gallon drums. And most everybody, including myself, had diarrhea. So you can imagine what that was like. Once that was, we got to a point that we had to have what they call roll call. Every couple hours, they would line us up outside, and if somebody had passed away, we would bring him out and hold him up, and then they would have the burial of him. But that's a little bit of what took place in the prison camp. And from there, I escaped because there was a volunteer. If you volunteered for a work detail, you got a little more food. Well, I volunteered with another fella from my outfit. We were captured the same day. And we went out onto a farm area. Well, while we were there was an air raid. Once the air raid was enforced, we decided, let's go. So we escaped, and we traveled down into the town, and we only traveled at night, and we met a slave labor was the Polish people, and the individual we met took us into town, and there was a bombed out home but had a huge fireplace. So he hid us out in the fireplace and brought us food for a couple of days. Then he arranged and got us a map of the area and how we could move during the day or at night. We couldn't move during the day because we were too obvious that we were in American uniform. And if you took your uniform off, then you were in trouble. So we went from there into this hid out in this fireplace, and once they got us the map and showing us a way to get out of town and everything, we left. And at one point, at another hideout, the guards, we were in the slave laborers' barracks. Well, it was like a home, and they hid us out under their beds while they were having a bed check. And that was a little hairy, because if we made a bit of noise, we'd have tipped them off that we were under their beds. So once we got out of that situation, we took off again. And I don't want to dwell on that too much, but here is my Stalag prison number. That was me at 18, which, so you were all getting pretty close to that. That was down in Camp Blanding, Florida, where I was taking my basic training. This is the town that we led, or I was part of, that went into the Siegfried Line, which the program where the Battle of the Bulge started. It's a little town of Echternach, which is in Luxembourg. This is a picture of the stream that we had to cross. Now, it was at flood stage at that time when we crossed. We had I'll show you the boat. And I'm getting direction from the back of the class here. My critic. I'll hear about that later. I must have done something wrong. I won't get out tonight. But this is along the stream. It's very picturesque and stuff right now, but you can picture this at flood stage. This is the type of boat it was a flat-bottom boat without all that gear that's in it right now. This is in the museum. And there were 16 of us in the boat, and 3 of us were assigned the job of bringing the boat back to the shore again, picking up another group and bringing them across the stream. Well, unfortunately, we didn't make it. The Germans had just hit another boat like this with our medical detachment in it. And once they got hit, we attempted to pick them up, but then they started opening fire on us, and we had to lay down in the boat, and we drifted downstream because we had no control of the boat. And once we got so far down in the stream, it didn't matter where we came ashore, the Germans were on both sides. And while we went ashore, we tried to work our way back to our line of where the Americans were, and we ran into a group of Germans that were going up on their line to remove some of their troops on a machine gun nest. And we were evenly matched. We were 3-3, but I fired my carbine, which didn't and I rolled a grenade, which didn't function, and one fella hollered, "Comrade," and I thought it was somebody he knew. Well, I didn't know at the time he was surrendering right away. Well, that didn't go along with the other fellow I was with, and the other fellow I was with was Jewish, and he always worried that the Germans would find out that he was Jewish, but he looked Italian, spoke French fluently, and him and I were buddies all through the time we were prisoners of war. And this is my uniform in Luxembourg, a town of Clairvaux, which is in Luxembourg. Oh, and in Luxembourg there, they have a day of remembrance. And every year, now I'm not sure if they do it now, but at the time I was still active with them, they would take their material and bring it down into the storefronts in Luxembourg and have people able to see it. this is the vessel that that's the vessel that I went overseas on. It was a Liberty ship, and it was called the Marine Raven. I left that ship here. I boarded that in Massachusetts, Boston Harbor. It was a Thanksgiving day. The following morning, we met the convoy, which was going to go to Europe off the New Jersey coast, and it took us 21 days, and we became ashore in Plymouth, England, and we spent a short time in a town called Christchurch. And from there, we went to, well, 21 plus, we went for the invasion of the German. We came aboard, or not came aboard, we came ashore in Le Havre, France. And then we worked our way across the country, and of course, they were moving pretty fast then. The American lines was moving. And that's, my parents got, these notices from the Western Union on my capture, and then when I was back into American control. This is George Patton, commander of the Third Army. And this is a statue that he's facing the German border, making sure that no one comes across again. And there's only one other statue like this, and it's in West Point. Oh, and this is that's worth money. That meant once you've got this rifle, it was a badge, and that was $21 more in your paycheck. That's a combat infantry badge. This is George Patton's grave in Luxembourg. It's in the flight pattern to the Luxembourg airport. These are the grave sites of World War II members that fought there in the Battle of the Bulge. Patton's grave sits facing all the other soldiers. I had the honor of placing a wreath on his grave site.
Fred, can you tell us why was George Patton buried there, not in America?
That was his request. He wanted to be with his troops. I don't know if you ever heard of these. This was in our packages that we used to get from the Red Cross. And that's 3 cigarettes. And I know you never heard of that brand. It's actually an English cigarette. There wasn't Camel or anything else. But we used to get, but that was one of them. And that's the biggest part of my life, was when I got my discharge. I finally done my duties to my country, and I was honorably discharged. And one of the biggest highlights I've had in my life happened just 3 years ago. I had to call, my division had been deactivated 17 years ago. Then just 3 years ago, it was reactivated, and I had the honor and a request by the 76th Infantry to come out and patch the general. And what the patch was putting the new insignia on his shoulder patch. Well, the general said, "Red, And he calls me by my nickname. Would you be able to patch the troops? And I said yes. So I wound up patching all the troops, and my cohort, Eddie, filmed the whole thing. It is on not Edison TV, but on YouTube. It's still playing. And from there, then in March again, a year ago, the general calls me and he says, Red, I want to hook up with you tomorrow night, and I want you to speak to the troops and give them encouragement. So, sure enough, he called right, and I spoke to the troops. It was almost like a conference call, but it was only one-sided. I spoke to them, they heard me. I couldn't hear the return. But the general wrote me later on an email, Red, he said, if you could have seen the expression on those soldiers' face. So he ended up, he sent me a picture of the troops that I had spoke to. And while I was talking to the troops, Eddie happened to walk in and he filmed me at home talking to the troops. So Eddie and I have been together for 14 years. I was with Eddie for 14 years as a field producer, which likewise, Eddie is a field producer also. Plus that, I had been filming and running the Metuchen television station for 3 years. So if anybody's got any questions, if I can answer them, just feed them to me.
Earlier you said you were a prisoner of war and you escaped. Were you at all nervous when you were escaping prison camp?
You know, when you were at my age, I was only 18, you think you're invincible. You don't really think, well, it's after it's over, then when you look back on it. Right now, I don't know if I mentioned it, I'm 90 years old. And so, no, I had no fear. Anybody else?
By the way, Red is from Edison, and this is something that you feel he didn't mention. Because he's from here, Edison was a much different area than you guys see it today. So maybe you guys want to ask him a little bit about what life was like right before he went to war and why he signed up.
Well, first off, I'll mention, it was Raritan Township. It wasn't Edison. It was Raritan Township. Edison didn't have a high school. You had an option to either go to New Brunswick, Perth Amboy, Highland Park, and New Brunswick. That was your choice when you got to the point of going to high school. And this area here was more or less swampland, where the high school is sitting here now. And Edison was, or Raritan Township then, was very rural. When I first came here and I got married and I lived on Michael Road, we had a 12-party phone line. We got 6 of the rings. Ford was just coming. Westinghouse was just coming in. American Envelope, which isn't here any longer. Ford is no longer here. New Car Carrier is no longer here. Yes.
Have you thought, do you think about staying in Europe after the war?
Do what?
Did you think about staying in Europe after the war ended?
No, but I did find out there were still people in France from World War I that never came back to the States.
How did you feel when you finally came back to the U.S.?
What was that?
How did you feel when you finally came back to the United States?
Well, that was another first of my life. I ended up coming back on a Liberty ship, and on the way back, our ship was hit about where the Titanic was hit during an iceberg. Well, our ship got hit, and they wired brake convoy. Well, can you imagine ships and heavy fog? You couldn't hardly see your hand in front of your face. Only had the ships would tow a big, like a telegraph pole, would cause a wake so they could see that there was something on the front of that wake. Well, we got hit by a aircraft, a small aircraft carrier. And fortunately, another guy that was an oil tanker seen what was taking place and tapped the aircraft carrier, so he went alongside the ship and cleaned off all of the lifeboats. So that was another hairy, and I ran up on deck. I figured, I'm not going to miss. I want to be one of those ships. If we're going to go, I want to have a lifeboat to be in. Well, fortunately, we made it to New York Harbor, but we missed the mine nets. They had mine nets that opened and closed different hours. Well, we missed the mine net opening, so we had to lay outside the harbor till the following morning, and we came in on a Sunday morning into New York Harbor, and then from there we came to Hoboken and by the ferry, and then we got a train, and we came into Camp Kilmer. Well, when we came into Camp Kilmer, there used to be, in fact, there's one part of Kilmer that's still evident. If you look at the Edison Animal Shelter, there's a structure in the distance. That's a bridge. And that's where the trains used to go east or west. They could make a turn and bring either way. Well, that's the only remnant that's left of what was the rail system going into Kilmer. Well, anyhow, back from that, I was on this train coming, and it stopped momentarily before it got onto the main line to go into Kilmer. Well, doing that, it was a Sunday morning, and my home was directly behind the rail line. Well, when they stopped, I jumped off that train. My father was in the driveway getting ready to take the children to Sunday school. Well, that made a big headline because I was the first one that ever did anything like that. So that's another first. I have so many firsts, I would have a hard time. In fact, we wouldn't have a long enough period to get it all in. So.
Did you ever think about serving in Korea or Vietnam?
No, because at least when I was in the service, we knew what we were fighting for. We knew who the enemy was. It's all a different type of war now. And if it wasn't for the German people, I was interrogated by the SS a couple of times. But being moved back and forth from different places, always on the move, I had one guard, and he had been here in the United States, and he went back to Germany, and he got trapped, and he couldn't get back to U.S. But he wound up as was like a home guard, and he was moving us, and he used to call us Johnnies. Johnnies, it was, and he stopped one time, and he took us into a private home, a friend of his, and he told the woman that I had diarrhea. She gave me some type of herb, cured it immediately. If it wasn't for somebody like her, I probably wouldn't be here today. because you dehydrate real fast, and the food was terrible. It was Limburger cheese, bread with a percentage of sawdust in it. And it was, I don't remember the weight, but there was one loaf, and it had to be divided for 16 people. And we got that once a day. And then there was they called it soup. Actually, it was just water heated up. So, somebody over there.
How did you originally get captured?
Well, I mentioned it before. I think it says pretty much in the thing you had there. We were in that boat that I showed you, crossing, and we went into the Siegfried Line. And I got back, and they were changing guards on their machine gun nests, and I was, unfortunately, we met them almost head to head. Well, I hope this went over well, and I didn't see anybody fall asleep, so I guess I did pretty well. It's been a pleasure for me to talk to you, and I know a great deal of you don't even realize what we're talking about. Some of them, you're not from this country, and I'll bet you if you asked if you had parents that are 50 years old, might remember what the Battle of the Bulge were. But I've run into quite a few people recently, look at me, and they say, "Red, I don't know what you're talking about." So I guess that's pretty much the same with you right now. It was 72 years ago that this took place.
Would you come back again some other time, Fred?
Well, I don't buy green bananas anymore.
Good idea.
Like I said, we're dying off at 430 a day. So, and that program that I looked up was 5 days ago. So the number has gone down again.
What do you think? What do you think would be the best way that students this age could recognize or pay back our World War II veterans?
Actually, we don't want paid back. We did this for our country, so we don't look forward. We want to make the country better for them to come forward, hoping that they'll do a better job than we did.
Got that?
Do you encourage us to join the armed service?
Well, I don't know. At the conditions we have today, that would be a personal thing. I would never want to direct somebody into a situation that I wouldn't want to be in myself. So that would be directly a personal thing, whether you want the military or not. But I wouldn't run to another country to keep from going into the military.
So you guys see a veteran of any, I know I make my children do it, and I don't need to ask them to do it anymore. They see somebody dressed in uniform or wearing a hat, they give them a hearty handshake and thank them for their service, and I think that's something that everybody should do.